Greetings, APUSH scholars, for our review for Unit 4. From top to bottom on the review sheet, the Missouri Compromise, what is it and why did it happen in 1820? Well, in 1820, Missouri is asking to come in as a slave state. This is the first state to be carved out of the new Louisiana Purchase. The three parts to it are the compromise is Missouri comes in as a slave state, but this is balanced by Maine coming in as a free state, and the 3630 line, which is the southern border of Missouri, is drawn across the rest of the Louisiana Purchase. Below it will be slavery. Above it, slavery will not be permitted. And the architect of this compromise is Henry Clay. Remember, the Talmadge Amendment is a proposal to free the children of slaves when they reach the age 25 and to allow no further introduction of slavery into Missouri. The goal here is this gradual emancipation, and this does not pass into law. Inconsistency in the Republican strict constructionism during Jefferson's term. Remember, Jefferson is a strict constructionist, but when he's in office, he buys Louisiana, and he puts an embargo and a non-intercourse act on foreign trade here. And there's nothing in the Constitution that says a president can issue unilaterally an embargo, and nothing that says you can buy real estate from a French dictator in the middle of North America, but he does it anyhow. Inconsistency in Federalist loose construction during Jefferson and Madison's terms. Well, the Federalists, who are fans of strong government, will be in opposition to this embargo, and there is this Essex Junto. It's a small cabal of Federalists who discuss the possibility of secession. They're in opposition to the Louisiana Purchase because they rightly predict that Louisiana will be an extension of Republican power. And the Federalists, remember, the Hartford Convention, are in opposition to the War of 1812. So these are all things which otherwise you might think they would support, that this is the right of a president to do under loose construction, but they're taking more of a limited states' rights position. So the roles change when you're in power sometimes. Changing roles of women. Remember this idea of the cult of domesticity, where the woman is supposed to stay home and raise children to be good moral Christian children, to be good patriots, to keep hearth and home ready for the man who's gone off to the factories and is returning for sort of sanctuary and respite after he's worked all day. But there are women who are working, and of course, probably most women are farm workers, but there's this thing going on with women, farm girls going to work in Francis Lowell's mills in Waltham, Massachusetts, because they're docile, they're happy to get off the farms, they're good workers. So these sort of a famous extension of where women are working and what they're doing. Reasons for the War of 1812. You have a number of things here. You have the continuing impressment, and this starts under Jefferson. But impressment, the seizure of American sailors off of American ships by the British Navy. You have the accusation that the British are stirring up and arming the Indians in the West. And this will lead to a third reason for the War of 1812, and that is the desire to seize Canada. And the war hawks are those who want war. They tend to be Southerners, they tend to be Westerners. Your New Englanders, who ironically, even though it's their ships that are being grabbed by the British, where their cargoes and their ships and their sailors are being seized, are making so much money that this is just part of the cost of doing business. It's the Federalists who will be in opposition and voting against the war. The Hartford Convention, which meets towards the end of the war in 1815, they are the unhappy Federalists who do not want this war and do not support it. And they meet and they talk about, they make proposals to amend the Constitution. None of these things happen, but they want a two-thirds vote to admit in new states. Remember, they're leery of these western states becoming Republican strongholds. They want a two-thirds vote by the states. Let's be specific here. They want a two-thirds vote, not both sides of Congress, but two-thirds of the states to let in new states. They want a two-thirds vote of the states to declare war, and they want a two-thirds vote to permit any sort of restriction on trade. And some are calling for secession. And the Hartford Convention, when the war is over, is going to be seen as not exactly a bunch of traitors, but a bunch of unpatriotic, disloyal Americans. And this will sort of drive the nail in the coffin, be the end of the Federalist Party. The importance of Andrew Jackson in the war. Jackson defeats the Brits at the Battle of New Orleans. This is a crushing defeat for the Brits. It's really an astounding victory by this ragtag Motley Crue army of Andrew Jackson's volunteers and soldiers and militiamen, and there's black soldiers, and there's Jean Lafitte's pirates, and they turn back the British. And this is seen as sort of the perception when the war is over that we've won because we've had this tremendous victory at the very end. The Treaty of Ghent ends the war of 1812. It ends in 1815, and it ends, there's a Latin phrase you should be familiar with. The condition is status quo ante bellum, and that is we're going back to the way things were before the war. And it's kind of a, there's technically there's no winner, no terms are met. In effect, the British leave us alone because if you remember your European history in 1815, Napoleon is defeated, so there's no more need to search and seize and American ships and impress their sailors. New developments in manufacturing, agriculture, and in transportation. Remember, in manufacturing, you got Sam Slater bringing over the plans for the first textile mill, and the Eastern Seaboard becomes famous for its textile industries. Think of Francis Lowell's mills and the farm girls that are working in them. Think of Eli Whitney and his invention of the cotton gin in 1794 and his interchangeable parts. And this will transform agriculture as well. It will extend the scope of slavery as new lands now can be cultivated for cotton, and cotton can be grown more cheaply. And for transportation, you have the building of a toll road from Maryland all the way out to Vandalia, Illinois. You have canal building, and the most famous is the Erie Canal, which opens in upstate New York in 1825, connecting the Hudson River with Lake Erie. Then you have Fitch and Fulton steamboats. Fitch is the first guy to build a steamboat, but Fulton is the first guy to commercialize it. Why did slavery grow in the early 1800s? Well, the cotton gin will make cotton, which is a relatively expensive cloth, into a cheap cloth, and there's this sort of insatiable demand, and slavery, cotton growing spreads, which means slavery spreads, and there's new territories to spread slavery into. So slavery accelerates after the 1800s. Changes in immigration in the early 1800s, think of in particular, there's still a lot of people coming over from Great Britain, but you have in addition here large numbers of Germans and large numbers of Irish. Remember the Irish potato famine. You have this exodus of starving, impoverished Irish, many of them coming to America. The era of good feelings, this refers to the end of the Federalist Party after the election of 1816, which James Monroe wins very handily, and he wins it again in 1820. And it is an era of good feelings because we perceive that we have won this war. We sort of kept our independence. The United States is growing. We're growing economically. We're growing in population. We're growing in territory. And there's pride in our democracy, pride in our place in the world here. Now, it's also a time of tensions in that in the backdrop, it's not perfectly peaceful because there's this argument over slavery, which will grow as we move farther west. There's an argument over the tariff, which is seen by Southerners to benefit the North at the expense of the South, having to pay higher prices for consumer goods. And then you have this continuing argument over the Bank of the United States, which is seen as a plot by the wealthy against the poor working man. One other thing here, in the era of good feelings, James Madison, when he runs for office, is going to win one of these two elections. He's going to win all of the electoral votes, and one of the electors is going to symbolically vote against him, vote for another candidate, just so that Washington has the record for getting all the electoral votes. But this is kind of symbolic of seemingly Americans are all united, are all one. And this president during the era of good feelings is James Madison, our fifth president, our fourth Virginian out of the first five. The American system is another one of these compromises by Henry Clay, and the idea here is to weave the country together economically in a system of interdependence, where the North will get a tariff to protect their industry, the South, and the West will get internal improvements. They'll get money for roads, money for canals. The West will get cheap, the government will sell land cheaply to encourage immigrants to move out to the West. And the idea here is as the South is able to grow more crops, to grow more cotton, say, they will have a industrial market in the North to sell to. So everybody will be getting something out of this. Some treaties to know. The Treaty of Rush-Bagot in 1817 will demilitarize the Great Lakes. The Convention of 1818, you may see this sometimes called the Treaty of 1818, will adjust the border or will regularize the border between the United States and Canada at the 49th parallel. And when you reach the Oregon Territory will have shared ownership. It will be temporarily jointly occupied by the United States and Great Britain. And we're talking about the Oregon Territory. This would be modern-day Washington State, Oregon, Idaho, part of Montana, and what would be British Columbia and Alberta. So this is kind of a large territory which is sort of left in limbo and peacefully divided and shared until we get to the Polk administration in the 1840s. The Transcontinental Treaty, also called the Treaty of Adams-Onis, is in 1819, where Spain will cede Florida to the United States, and the border will be defined between New Spain, or Mexico, and the Louisiana Purchase will be defined very much in the United States' favor. The Monroe Doctrine is a statement by President Monroe of U.S. opposition to colonization or recolonization in Latin America by European countries. Remember, during the Napoleonic era, all of Latin America, with the exception of Puerto Rico and Cuba, declared their independence, and there's this fear that the Europeans, perhaps Spain, perhaps somebody else, will try to go in and retake over land, Mexico and South. And there's a reiteration that the United States will not meddle in European affairs. So we're holding Europe at a distance. They're not supposed to be meddling in our backyard, and we're saying that we will leave the Europeans alone as well. A continuation of Washington's proclamation of neutrality, and a continuation of Adams not getting involved in the fray between England and France, and a continuation of Jefferson, too, who had his embargo and non-intercourse acts. The Supreme Court decisions you should know: McCulloch versus Maryland. This is where Maryland tries to tax the Bank of the United States, and this decision says that a state cannot impede the power of the federal government. The federal government is not subordinate to the states. And there's this notion that the power to tax is the power to destroy, and the state cannot do this. The federal government has the right to be left alone by the states here. Dartmouth College versus Woodward. The case here is that the state has unilaterally nullified the contract that Dartmouth College has, or the charter, which is a contract to exist independently. And Dartmouth College is being taken over, and this is a decision by the Supreme Court that a contract cannot be unilaterally broken by one party. The sanctity of contracts is upheld. Gibbons versus Ogden. There is an attempt here by a state to regulate interstate trade by giving a monopoly to a ferry boat operator across the Hudson River, and only Congress, remember, only Congress can regulate interstate trade. The Supreme Court rules that states cannot block other states from trading between borders here. The Charles River Bridge and the Warren Bridge case is an interesting one, where the Charles River Bridge company or bridge had been given sort of a monopoly on collecting tolls across the Charles River, which is in Boston. And a free bridge is built downstream, and that's called the Warren Bridge. And the Charles River Bridge is saying implied in the right to give a toll was the right for there not to be another bridge for somebody who would break their monopoly. And the court here is ruling in favor of the public good, but really they're ruling in the favor of the broadest economic activity. So this is your short drive-by review of Unit 4 on various topics here: the War of 1812, the Monroe Doctrine, Sectionalism versus Nationalism, Era of Good Feelings, Missouri Compromise, and some Supreme Court cases. So study hard, study early, study smart, and signing off.